I'm Josh, I'm an investment researcher and a qualified actuary, and here's how to actually achieve your goals in 2025. So the key to actually achieving your goals in 2025 is to accurately assess the feedback from your actions. Now, I'm going to assume here that you've set yourself a goal, you're taking consistent action towards that goal, and you're assessing your feedback towards that goal as well in some way, a measurable way. Like the easiest example here I would use is weight loss. So your goal is to weigh 100 kilos, you currently weigh 120, you're taking some action each day to put yourself in a caloric deficit to help you achieve that goal. So the key to achieving that goal, in my opinion, is to accurately assess the feedback from your actions. So in this video, I'm going to run through the 3 ways your feedback can take shape and how you can use that to inform your decision making. And that will help you achieve your goals. So the first characteristic of your feedback is it will have some sort of noise or fluctuations or randomness. So if we set ourselves a goal, we're taking action towards that goal, we're assessing feedback through some sort of measurement mechanism, we will see randomness or noise in that feedback. Now, I'm going to go back to the weight loss example here, that we've all probably been there where we've put ourselves in a caloric deficit, we've skipped meals, we've eaten well the night before, and you weigh yourself in the morning and the scales have gone the wrong way. That's happened to me a million times. And then if you look at any kind of weight loss chart, like my own included, you'll definitely see a sort of randomness or noise pattern. Even though the long-term trend could be in a certain direction, the day-to-day fluctuations are all over the place. So the feedback you're getting from your actions, i.e. your daily weight, is pretty volatile and pretty noisy. And basically you have to understand that when you are taking action in the world, it's basically your body moving through the environment. It's going to be reacting to a number of different factors. There are going to be so many dependencies that you probably haven't taken into account. So it's really unlikely that your progress is going to be a straight line linear. Now, there's a couple of great books written about how randomness affects us in our daily lives. Obviously, Thinking Fast and Slow, which I talk about all the time, which talks about how much randomness there is in the real world and how humans actually like to try and explain that randomness, even though it's just noise and comes from nowhere. Nassim Taleb in his book Fooled by Randomness talks about how randomness affects us in our daily lives and how we often like to put some cause behind it. He calls it the narrative fallacy, and he talks about the amount of work that goes into people coming up with narratives to try and explain random events in financial markets and the media. We live in a complex adaptive system and the world is just random. So I would definitely recommend that out. So another source of randomness is that when we take action, there is a delay between us getting the feedback, and environments where we can learn quickly have a really rapid feedback mechanisms. So like a daily weigh-in would be really helpful for you to assess your calorie input into your body each day, but some actions are over a very, very long time horizon, so they have a massive delay, and the longer the delay, the more likely it is we over or undershoot our actions because we can't see the immediate results. So there's obviously an element of flawed human judgment in our action and how we assess that feedback, and that's spoken a lot about in Daniel Kahneman's other book, Noise. He talks about judges that have different decisions on the same case, or radiologists that have different decisions on the same x-ray. Essentially, any action you take in the spot is not going to be perfect. There's going to be an element of, or a margin of error in any action. Therefore, as you over and undercompensate, your feedback is going to be volatile as a result. And tying to that point of you never actually taking perfect action, always being like a little bit out, this naturally creates cycles because you overshoot and undershoot, which means you're never going to perfectly manage your progress through an environment. And I think that's spoken about really well in Howard Marks's book, Mastering the Market Cycle. I think anything that has kind of human judgment or markets included have this kind of ebb and flow and this natural cycle element to them. And you'll see that in a weight loss chart where you'll kind of have this long-term trend, but your weight is kind of volatile around that because you're never actually perfectly eliminating all the random variables in your progress. You're just taking the best action based on the best information you have at that time. So how do we deal with this when we're trying to move towards our goals? Well, we just acknowledge that there are going to be ups and downs on a daily basis and just try and focus on the long-term trends. Try and update your information set as best as possible so that you're taking the best possible action, and recognize that if you're doing something that has a really long kind of delay, so that could be like doing well at work, you might have like an annual review cycle. So you're going to have to work consistently for a year before you actually get any feedback on that work that you've done in terms of like monetary bonus or salary improvement. So the longer the feedback delay, the harder it is to stick with. And also if it feels like you're going in the wrong direction in the short term, just trust the process, stick to what you're doing, trust that the actions you're taking are correct and only correct them if in the long term things aren't working out. So the second thing you will see in your feedback is infrequent large changes or jumps. So there's a story in Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich where a young miner was getting swept up in the gold rush, went out to California, started mining for gold, was there for months, and then just decided to give up. And he was ultimately 3 feet away from gold. So if he carried on mining just for 3 feet more, he would have hit his gold pile and got his bounty, and he would have finally seen some kind of positive benefit from the action he was taking towards his goal, which was to get rich. And some feedback in life can feel like this. I spoke about feedback with really long delays previously, and this kind of falls into that camp. Yeah, it can feel like you're getting absolutely nowhere for a very long time, so you're zero/losing money. In terms of financial markets, there are investments like options where, yeah, you can feel like you're losing money for a long time, but then you suddenly get that massive explosive payoff. Or if you're a gold miner, you're like toiling away for months and months and months, and you finally get that gold bounty at the end. So the key here is just to keep going and not give up. And this is often the hardest form of perseverance, but the rewards in certain circumstances can be huge when you finally get that payoff. The important thing here is to understand that there are these big jumps and things aren't gradual in general in this world, because you have multiple interdependencies, you have network effects, you have cascade effects. The world we live in is more fractal than normal, if that makes sense, or more like a power law than normally distributed. Everyone loves the normal distribution because it's nice and smooth and everything is predictable, but you do get these large outside moves, and it's important to recognize that and try and harness them in your journeys towards your goals. So for example, if you have a weight loss journey, what you might find is that you're seeing absolutely no progress for ages, and then suddenly the stars align and you suddenly lose like 10 pounds. Yeah, that can definitely happen. So bearing this in mind when you're moving towards your goals, if you're not seeing any progress for a long time, recognize that you might just be 3 feet from gold. There are lots of discussions of these outside moves, tipping points. Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, for example, is a classic one here. It talks about how the world can exhibit these large moves which people don't really expect, and they always get labeled as kind of outliers, or, oh, that was a freak event. But freak events are relatively common in this world, so it's important to take them seriously. And again, Nassim Taleb talks about this all the time in his book, The Black Swan, which is a book about kind of, I guess, adverse events. For certain traders, these events were actually how I described, which is they make a huge amount of money after losing money potentially for 10 years. So yeah, Nassim Taleb obviously talks about these kind of large outsized moves and how they appear in the world. Richard Bookstarborough again talks about how they kind of occur in markets. So if you have an investment portfolio, you might not be making any money for a very long time, but then suddenly you make loads. And in Bookstabor's book, he also talks about how seemingly small actions can compound over time and eventually lead to some sort of explosive outcome. So we spoke about that in previous videos about compounding and how you can get this kind of positive feedback loop going. But in his book, he says, nonlinear systems are complex because a change in one component can propagate through the system to lead to surprising and apparently disproportionate effects elsewhere. For example, the famous butterfly effect. So everyone's heard about the butterfly effect. Butterfly flaps its wings in one part of the world and creates a tornado in the other. That's how a seemingly small effect can propagate through a complex adaptive system to lead to some sort of crazy outcome. So big events do happen. If you're getting frustrated with your progress, you think you're doing everything right, but you're not seeing any results, stick with it, because you could be 3 feet from gold. Then the final way your feedback could take shape is kind of a combination of the first two, and it's called punctuated equilibrium. So most progress towards a goal will have periods of consolidation and periods of rapid progress. We call that punctuated equilibrium. The term actually came from the theory of evolution. So prior to the 1970s, everyone thought that evolution kind of progressed gradually, and Darwin himself was a self-proclaimed gradualist, that things just changed slightly over time, more like a normal distribution, like everything was kind of located relatively close to the mean, and over time that propagated into large changes. But actually, in a landmark paper in 1972, which is discussed in The Origin of Wealth by Beinhocker, he says that in a landmark paper in 1972, the paleontologists Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould overturned this conventional wisdom and argued that the fossil record shows that biological evolution has not followed a smooth path. Rather, it's gone through large periods of relative stasis, i.e. consolidation, interdispersed with periods of explosive innovation and periods of massive extinction. So it kind of goes against the kind of gradualist mindset of everything just happens very gradually. What you tend to see is these periods of consolidation where nothing really happens, and then these explosive periods of change. So you see that in the financial markets all the time. You tend to get a massive move and then like a period of consolidation. You see this in weight loss. I was even looking at the latest kind of YouTube videos on weight loss, and they talk about how we go through a rapid phase of dieting. You need to give your body time to rest and consolidate. So you have that period of consolidation at the end where you're not losing weight or trying to gain weight. You're just kind of in the middle trying to manage the new normal for you as your body gets used to your new body weight. In the book, The Systems View of Life, again, I've got this on Kindle because it's too expensive to buy a hard copy. But yeah, they talk about this kind of tussle within complex systems or the world we live in, of, periods of order and disorder. So this describes it really well. They say the systems may also oscillate between order and chaos, contributing to the appearance of randomness. So again, when you're taking progress towards your goal, it can appear like you're not going anywhere or you're not doing anything, but you need to recognize the overall shape of your progress will probably follow this punctuated equilibrium where you have like periods of rapid change and periods of consolidation. I probably saw this most in my salary progression at work, how I felt this. And looking back now, if I'd known this is how things work, I would have been much happier and probably would have done better, because I would have had the motivation to continue to kind of work and add value while I wasn't getting immediate financial rewards for it. But the way my salary kind of progressed, so I've been working for 11 years now, it kind of went from very steady progressions from when I started to, I would say, probably like 5 years in, I was doing actuarial exams and I got a pay rise for each actuarial exam I passed, and I got very steady promotions because we're on the grad scheme. It was all very, I'm going to say, like linear and all very normally distributed, and we kind of knew what was going on. And then as soon as I finished my actuarial exams and got promoted to a certain level of seniority at work, this like vast expanse opened up in front of me, and I kind of thought, well, what's my next step? I don't really know what to do here. And then I definitely went into a period of consolidation, and it was like 3 years where I basically got no pay rise. It was very minor, maybe in line with inflation. Well, I tried to work out what I was doing and the value I was having to the company. But I found these years really, really tough because I wasn't seeing the progress. And a year can be a long time. 3 years is a very long time. But then I persevered and continued to add value, moved my career into an area which I thought had big growth potential, which is sustainable investing. And then I got the biggest pay rise of my life, and then got continued bigger pay rises after that and got promoted and everything. So I think it was a great example of, steady progress, consolidation, and then like a rapid change afterwards as well. So if I'd known this idea of punctuated equilibrium and that I was working in a complex adaptive system and my feedback, which I was measuring by my salary, was likely to exhibit this kind of shape, then I probably would have been a lot happier and probably given up less and given more to the company if I knew that was the case. So there we have it. That's punctuated equilibrium. It's a combination of the first two. I think the key thing is there's periods of consolidation, there's periods of rapid change. Just focus on the inputs. One of the things I loved was trust the process throughout all this. Try to ignore the noise, focus on the long-term trends, and don't stop 3 feet from gold. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out more from me.